Alright, welcome to part 2 of the pen tool basics, and we're still going to be in Photoshop for this one. What we're going to do is work on this shape, and this is a very rough version of it that I sketched out on paper and scanned in. And so this is going to be the tracing object right here. You might be familiar with this shape. You've probably seen it in some boutique signs or wedding invitations, things like that. And it can be a little bit of a beast to make, but we're going to work on it. Oh, I clicked and dragged it into the new file. It's too big, so I'm going to zoom out, Control T, make it smaller, and I'll zoom back in so you can see it pretty well. Okay, so here's our shape. This is our tracing layer, and what we're going to do is basically just like the last tutorial that I did. We need to duplicate this layer and hit OK, and then lower the transparency so we have our tracing paper layer, is what I'm calling it. And you need to select that pen tool, and basically you're going to trace it just like you did that crest, that English crest. So I'll start on a sharp point, and I'll come down here and click and drag, and I'll come about here, and I'm just kind of, this is the first time I haven't done this yet, so I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go. Click and drag. This is all rounded, so I think I'm going to undo that, Control Z, and you notice that the more complex the shape is, the closer you need to make your points. So I'm not doing them too far apart from each other. I'm still doing rounded curves, click and drag, until I get to a sharp corner where I just click, and then I'll continue on, click and drag, and really you just follow the outline. It's pretty simple, lots of clicking and dragging, and just pretty delicate. You just kind of play with it. And don't forget, you can always come back and adjust it, so it doesn't have to be exact. I wish this sketch was a little bit more exact, but we'll be able to play with that as well. So, if I turn off my tracing layers, I can see that I have basically the shape that I'm going for. It's pretty stinking rough, but what's kind of killing me is that it's not symmetrical. So hopefully if you sketch something out, you do something more symmetrical than what I drew. But I'm going to select the arrow, direct selection tool, or A, and what I can do is I can select the points, and remember I can move them around. I don't want to do that, undo, but you can select multiple points at once if you hit shift and just hold that shift key down, and then I can move them around, maybe try to line them up a little bit better, get these sharp points to be a little bit more symmetrical. Really it's going to be a lot of playing around. It's kind of funky looking. You can bring these down. The pen tool, again, is all about playing around with it, figuring out what you like. Almost everything you outline is going to take on a different nature than everything else you outline. They're all a little bit different. This one's kind of tricky. And there's a lot of ways you could do this. You could create, honestly, you could just create a quarter of it and then duplicate it and reflect it, and so that you get a really symmetrical piece, kind of tile it up into pieces. I'm not doing that here. And once you have that, it does feel kind of bumpy. It's not real smooth. So I'm not sure if there's a smooth tool in Photoshop. I haven't ever used one. Illustrator has a nice little tool that will kind of go around and smooth everything, but we'll get to Illustrator. We'll do this in Illustrator also. But here is your shape. If you hit V, you can move it around, and there you go. Again, I recommend starting with a better sketch or a better drawing. Okay, so now we're going to do this in Illustrator, which there's a little bit of a difference when you're working with the pen tool in Illustrator, just because layer properties function differently. So you have your file opened up, And we want to place that tracing image in. So I'm going to go to File, Place, and select my custom shape. And here it is. And I'm going to rotate it with the selection arrow. Okay, so here's this layer. But the problem is if I want to do stuff on top of it, I'm going to end up moving it, because that's the beauty of Illustrator, is you can move multiple things at once without having to select them over in the palette, the layers palette. So I want to take this layer and lock it. So now I can't do anything to it. It's frozen there. And I need to start a new layer on top of it where I'm going to draw my shape. And there's one problem. You know how we had to make tracing layers in Photoshop? If I start drawing something over here, it's also going to kind of block out the shape, so I can't see it. You can see that it's hidden under there. So I'm going to delete that, make another new layer. What I need to do is go to this eyeball over here and hit Control on the keyboard, hold it down, and then click the eyeball, and then let go. And you can see it's kind of like a white eyeball now. And what that means is I can outline this and it'll just show up as an outline. So I'm actually going to change this stroke color down here because I want to be able to see it over this black line that I'm tracing. So I'm going to start again and do just like I did in Photoshop. Do a little quicker this time. Just click and drag, click and drag. That's basically it. Let's see. Okay. So if I come back here and do the Control, click on the eyeball again, and I turn off the layer underneath, I can now see that I have this shape here in Illustrator. And basically it's very similar to Photoshop, where if I select the white direct selection tool, the white arrow, or A, I can select a point and adjust it. Whoops, just like that. You know, I can do whatever. The cool thing is I don't have to hit Shift to select multiple ones. I can just use that white arrow and draw around the points that I want to select, and I can move them all at once. So if I don't like this, you know, I can move this whole thing up here. Just whatever I select with that white arrow is going to adjust. So that's kind of cool. I'm really not trying to do it exact, because that would have to require a much better original drawing than what I provided, but you get the gist, I think, I hope. And you know, I can go ahead with the black arrow, the selection tool. I can change the fill down here. That's the solid box. I can make it, let's make it yellow, and I'll make the stroke, the line around it, I'll make that like a blue color, and there we go. So that's how to draw a basic shape. One other thing that I was trying to kind of see if I had the option in Photoshop off the top of my head, but I didn't, is this smoothing tool. So if you here in Illustrator, if you go to the pencil and you go to this middle one, it's a smoothing tool. If you've taken an art class, a drawing class, you kind of know how these work. Kind of smudge things, right? But what you're going to do is smooth these lines out. So you just kind of have your shape selected and start drawing over them, and it'll just kind of start to, it tries to fill in the pieces. It doesn't always do the greatest job, but sometimes it does smooth it out a bit so it doesn't look super jaggedy. Because the more points you add, the more risk it has of looking jagged and unnatural. And you know, that's kind of the risk you have when doing a pretty unique shape like this. So, but you know, theoretically, let's say this is the shape I wanted, and there it is. And if I wanted to just do it in Illustrator, because I think you can do more with it, it's a little bit quicker. What you can do is just select it if you want to finish it in Photoshop. If you're utilizing photographs and textures and things like that, I can just select it, copy it, Control C, and come on over to Photoshop. Just take a second, and I'll turn this old one off, and Control V to paste it. I'll paste it as a smart object, which means I can edit it in Photoshop and adjust it. Hit Enter, and there it is, right there in Photoshop. I go between Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator all the time. and that's totally a fine workflow. You're gonna just find out what's easier to do in what program, and you'll end up moving back and forth. So that's it for part 2 of the basic pen tool, and next time we'll just draw a basic one of these basic shapes, and we'll learn how to add points to it and modify those to get custom shapes. See you then.